One of the things that you mentioned at the tail end of your last comments was about critical race theory and the attacks on critical
Yeah.
race theory. And as I've said on this show before, critical race theory does not, in any way, try to frame white people as being overwhelmingly being these oppressors and black people being these victims. Instead, what critical race theory says is that we have a system in place that has rules, laws, procedures that govern over us that have racism laced and baked within it. That laced and baked within it, if we use that analogy, to have something baked in it, sometimes it doesn't always mean you're exactly tasting that ingredient, but it doesn't mean that it's not there. And that is part of that historical legacy that plays out for us here. And we know that in schools, particularly in Republican led legislation, state legislatures, that there is a huge attack on teachers. From Florida to
Yeah.
my great state of Tennessee, where a teacher just put out where she was having to go through books that she has used for years that she knows really help students. She's having to comb through them, looking at titles, looking at authors, looking at pictures, looking at words in the book to try to figure out what she is and is not going to teach. What is this backlash? What are teachers' unions doing to try to fight against this? Why are teachers fighting against it? Because I think it's important for people to know that the people who teach our kids are saying, look, this isn't right. We need to do something different. What is happening here? What can you tell people about how this debate might play out this fall?
Yeah, unfortunately, we have across the country, but specifically in states in the South, to your point, where we have Republican legislatures that are kind of guiding and driving and impacting education. We recognize that education is largely a state level issue. Um, so we have people advancing bills that are targeting two different things, very intentionally. Number one, teaching of accurate history. Right? I don't even talk about it as critical race theory. They're banning books that teach accurate history of the United States of America. And number two, they're fighting against social emotional learning strategies. This is critical to kind of pull these two together because they're advancing both at the same time. Number one, because as we know, since 2020, the majority of children in America have been children of color.
Hmm.
Since 2011, the majority of live births have been children of color. So now we have, as the children are largely black and brown, we have people telling us we shouldn't teach history of black and brown people in the states that are more disproportionately black and brown, southern states. So what they're saying is children can't see themselves or hear their stories in the books. That's when you hear CRT, when you hear people talking about critical race theory, what they're saying is we don't believe black and brown children should see or hear their stories in the books that they are getting in public schools. Number two, what they're saying when they fight against social emotional learning strategies or trauma informed strategies, they're saying that we don't have to care about how you feel or the traumas that have sent you forth, even in the midst of a pandemic where we recognize that social isolation, disconnection, are creating more challenges for young people in their socialization and how they present in the world. So, this is what these bills are fighting against. They're telling your kids they shouldn't see their stories in the books. And they're saying, we don't care what happened to you. You have to come stand and deliver. And teachers, rightly, are standing up against this. They're saying, number one, we need to be able to have some input and some authority on the things that we have learned about education. We recognize that there's a thing called relational capacity. It is students' cultural connection with the content and the teacher that allows them to learn. And if you strip these things away, you're reducing relational capacity in the classroom. Number two, teachers are saying you can't be fighting at the school board meeting over content because frankly, the curriculum decisions need to be made by people who have been trained to do this work. And we need to be able to do things that are responsive to children's needs. So finally, teachers are saying very clearly in the Voices of the American Federation of Teachers, we need Democrats specifically, right? So I'm reporting, I'm not advocating, but they are saying they need Democrats to stand up around educational issues because we've gotten to the point where Republicans have about a 30 to 40% advantage in polls on education issues. The same people who are saying we shouldn't teach accurate history, the same people who are saying we shouldn't care about how students should show up, we should hold them to standards that are unreasonable, are the people who actually have the political advantage in the education conversation. So I'm appreciative. of the American Federation of Teachers and other educators who are saying this has to be a voting issue. This has to be something that has to be contested and contended by both parties to have a debate over how we're going to educate the next generation. And are we going to trust the professionals? Is the question. Are we going to trust the professionals who know and have been trained for this? Or are we going to kind of leave it to the whims of those who want to use children as political objects in their game to gain power? Because that's exactly what's going on right now. And it's not serving children well, it's not forming them for society or to make an impact in the world. I'll say this final thing. I'm interested in this. The Children's Affairs Fund runs based upon the model of Freedom Summer. We run freedom schools in 29 states across the country. This summer, we served 11,000 children and their families through this program. And it is focused and built around an integrated reading curriculum that is culturally responsive in nature. Because we have learned that when children see themselves in the books, when they connect with the story, they learn better. And so, because their literacy rates are going up, and we're taking a trauma-informed approach, and we see the results in partnerships and communities and states across the country, we've been trying to work with parents and campaigns to educate parents around these issues, because we've got to come out and turn out not just for midterm elections, but in election, local elections, state legislative elections, because this is where this is ultimately being meted out. Around school boards in your local community and around state legislative elections. So you may not know who your state rep is or your state senator is, but that's who's impacting and creating pressure around whether your children get to see themselves in the books, hear the stories of their kin and their ancestors, and whether they will be cared for based upon things that are traumatizing them in community. That's the bottom line. And we need everyone to stand up for it.
Yeah, I mean, look, as people say, if you want to hide something from people, put it in a book. What's interesting here is people aren't even going to have access to the books. And that's what's unfortunate, particularly when we start talking about representation and what these books are. I really encourage people to look at the book list, read
Yes.
some of them, figure out and say, wow, so this book was banned. Why? People also need to go back to the core tenets of critical race theory and look at some of the founding scholars of this work. And what they'll see is that the narrative that they're hearing in the media, that they're hearing from some political pundits, is so far off base. I mean, as an academic, it really annoys me to kind of see that, and unfortunately to see the way that our children are being harmed for that. So, look, I could talk to you all day, Reverend Dr. Starsky Wilson. I appreciate you being on the show. He tweets at
Thanks, sir.
Rev Dr. Starsky. So, Reverend Dr. Starsky Wilson, who's president and CEO of the Children's Defense Fund, doing some amazing work. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on the Laura Coast Show today.
Hey, thank you for having me. I appreciate the time with you, brother.
All right. Everyone, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back.